Next is proteins. So proteins are very important in our body. I like to think of proteins as the workhorse of our body. Whenever we're doing something, whenever our body, both structure, we'll talk about a little bit about enzymes, hormones, antibodies. Proteins have a lot of function inside our body. And when you look at somebody, basically what you're seeing is proteins. The hair in the body, the fingernails, the proteins in the skin. That's basically what you're seeing. And so this makes up most of our body. The way the proteins work is we have things called amino acids. And you may have heard of these. There's things called essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. When we're eating, we have to get proteins, we have to get amino acids in our diet. Some are called essential amino acids because we actually have to get those amino acids in our diet. If we don't get those amino acids, we're going to have problems making the proteins that our body needs. Non-essential amino acids our body can, so we don't have to get those in our diet. An amino acid is made up of a carbon group. Here you can see the carbon in the middle. And then there's also an amino group. The reason it's called an amino group is because there's nitrogen in this group. Then on this other side we have a carboxylic acid group. So whenever we have a carbon attached to an amino group, a carboxylic acid group, and then something we call an R group, then you know we have an amino acid. This is a generic structure of amino acid. Every amino acid has these parts. The difference between the different amino acids is the R group. So for example, this is glycine. This is an example of an amino acid. Notice we have an amino group here. We have our carboxylic acid group here. And then the R group is simply a hydrogen in this case. This is the simplest type of amino acid. We can have more complicated amino acids, such as aspartic acid or lysine or cysteine. Notice cysteine has a sulfur. But as you look at these 4 different amino acids, notice that the only difference is in the R group. All of them have the amino group, and all of them have the carboxylic acid group. Those are the proteins. Proteins in our body, as we already mentioned, had a lot of different functions. The way this happens is that take these amino acids in our body using dehydration reactions again, attaches the amino acids all together in long chains to form structures, to form these proteins. So we have things that are called fibrous proteins. So here are these long fibers here made of protein. These long fibers are composed of these amino acid chains all hooked together. We can have things called globular proteins. And the way that we get a globular protein is we again have all these amino acids attached together in different structures to form this globular protein. This example here is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is made up of 4 different amino acid chains, all attached together to form some sort of structure. Whenever we're talking about proteins, there's an important thing to remember, and that is that the structure of the protein equals the function. Every protein has a different function, and that function is determined by the structure. So this structure that you see here in this hemoglobin group, that is specific to hemoglobin. The way that it's able to function as its job of carrying oxygen in our body, in our blood, in our red blood cells, the way it functions that way is because of the structure it has. If you were to take this hemoglobin and change that structure, that's going to be a problem. And that's what happens in things such as sickle cell anemia, which is a disease caused by a misformed hemoglobin molecule. So the structure of a protein determines its function. Another very important function of proteins is an enzyme. What enzymes do is they are used in chemical reactions inside our body. And we'll see some examples of enzymes as we go throughout this semester. When you think about digestion is carried out by enzymes. Again, the structure determines the function. The structure of an enzyme is going to determine what that enzyme can do. Enzymes are used in many chemical reactions. It speeds those up. It allows the chemical reactions to happen using less energy input, and allows them to continue through our body. I encourage you to look at the video about enzymes, or look up some videos about enzymes and learn a little bit more about them. But we'll see them a little bit more in this throughout the semester here. Because of we want to keep moving here, I'm going to leave proteins. But again, proteins are very important. Remember, structure equals the function of proteins. I want to talk just briefly about the last type of organic compound, and that's nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are important because they are what form DNA and RNA, and we'll see these a little bit more in the next chapter. But I just want to point out the types of nucleic acids. Every nucleic acid has 3 parts to it, and they're shown here. It has a phosphate group. So here's our phosphorus with 4 oxygen groups around it. Okay, it has a deoxyribose sugar, or in the case of RNA, it would have a ribose sugar. So this is a sugar ring. It's a 5-carbon sugar. It is a carbohydrate. So this carbohydrate together with a phosphate group, and then what we'd call a nitrogen base here, because of all the nitrogen in it, that makes up a nucleic acid, or a nucleotide. This nucleotide here is the building block of DNA, or RNA if this was a ribose sugar. So inside our body we have these nucleotides hooked together in these long chains, and the way that we hook them together again is dehydration reaction. Hook it in together in long chains to form DNA and RNA, and they function in our body. This nitrogen base is what can change from one nucleotide to another nucleotide. So there's 4 different nucleotides in DNA, and there's 4 nucleotides in RNA. So adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine are the nucleotides in DNA. And the only difference between these nucleotides is in this nitrogen base. So this is being showed here as adenine. This is what adenine looks like. Guanine is going to be a little bit different, cytosine and thymine. These 3 here, as well as uracil, are the 4 nucleotides in RNA. So there's no thymine in RNA, and there's no uracil in DNA. But other than that, they've looked very similar. The only difference here is going to be in that ribose group there. So RNA and DNA are very important because they are the information packages inside our body. They're what hold all the information. This shows a DNA molecule here. And if you look at this DNA molecule, you'll notice these letters here that are poking out in the middle. These are the different nucleotide bases. We have guanine, we have adenine, cytosine, we have thymine. The deoxyribose sugar and the phosphate group here are going to be in what we call the backbone of the DNA molecule. So this part here, this purple and kind of bluish purple backbone, that's formed by the deoxyribose sugar and the phosphate group. If we go back here, the deoxyribose and the phosphate group here are what form that backbone, and then the nitrogen bases are poking out into the middle. And this is how we form this classic ladder sequence when we're looking at DNA. And here's the nitrogen base that sticks out into the middle. So here's our DNA, our ladder. It basically holds the information to build the proteins that are used inside our body. I want to point out one other type of nucleotide, and that is ATP, which we've already mentioned. But ATP is very important because this is the energy currency inside our body. This little molecule here holds a little bit of energy that is released to carry out all the chemical or the metabolic processes inside our body. And this ATP comes from the breakdown of glucose from food that we eat. So this is an ATP molecule. Notice that it is a nucleotide because we have our ribose, our 5-carbon sugar ribose. We have a phosphate group here, and we have an adenine base, a nitrogen base. This is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate because we have these 3 phosphate groups here. These bonds here between the phosphates, this is where the energy is stored that is used to carry out processes inside our body. And ATP is used for a number of processes that we'll see throughout this semester. It can be used to transport molecules from inside to outside the cell. ATP, the energy in ATP can be used for muscle contraction. We'll see this when we talk about the muscular system inside the body. So that energy in the ATP is what is used to cause the muscle cells to contract. Also used for chemical work. So chemical reactions inside our body, digestion. So in order to break down the food that we eat, it takes energy, and this is given to us by ATP. And so we're constantly building up ATP inside our body, and then we're also breaking it down. So notice that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, breaks down to ADP, meaning adenosine diphosphate, in a phosphate group. Our body can then take ADP and phosphate, and using the energy from food, form it back into ATP. So this process here, the breakdown of ATP into ADP and phosphate, and then the building back up of ATP through the breaking down, the burning of food that we eat, this is constantly going on inside our body 24/7. If this ever stops, we wouldn't be able to survive very long. So these are the organic molecules. So we've looked at carbohydrates, we looked at lipids, we looked at proteins, nucleic acids, which are DNA and RNA, and also ATP, which is one of those nucleotides. These are the organic molecules that build our body. And this is where we're going to leave our chapter on basic chemistry. I encourage you to read the chapter again, or to go over some of the parts you maybe didn't understand from this lecture in the book. You can read those parts of the book again. Send me emails about your questions. Look up animations and things that you can find to explain these concepts a little bit better. And we'll be moving on into the next section soon.